There's never a dull moment when it comes to Minnesota sports. Whether it's positive or negative.
The Yankees have swept the Twins.
Minnesota Sports Chat has you covered. Talking nothing but Minnesota sports all year long. It's time now for the soon-to-be award-winning, if only in his own mind, Minnesota Sports Chat with your host, Ross Brendel.
Well, that would be me, and welcome inside edition number 245 of the soon-to-be award-winning Minnesota Sports Chat presented by my friends at Beans Coffee Company. Award-winning, that is, if only in my own mind. A little housekeeping here out of the gate. This is the first pod in 3 weeks, maybe a month, so apologies on that. It actually astounds me how many people reach out to me via the email machine at minnesotasportschat@gmail.com or even on the X machine just to make sure that I'm okay and that this pod still exists. It does. It is my goal to give you at least one podcast every week. However, this is what I do for fun, and Hubbard Broadcasting allows me to continue to do this venture for fun, 95% of the time using their own studios. But I say that because they are the A job. They get all my attention. This is what I do for fun to satisfy my own itch of being a C-level podcast host. So hopefully that explains a little bit the hiatus here. It is my goal to get back into doing one of these weekly. That's always my goal, but sometimes life gets in the way. And we start this edition of my renewed commitment to weekly podcasts with you, with my guy, my close personal friend, Mr. Daniel House. Daniel, how are you doing?
Doing well. Getting ready for the combine, man. It's draft season. Yes. Studying hard the prospects in this draft. Intriguing draft class, Ross. I think this is not the Ferrari draft class where you got a lot of blue chip players that are coming out of the garage nice and clean and shiny. There's going to be more of that, like, Chevy Silverado, high country type of vehicle that, it's going to be a really good starting prospect for you. Going to get you a lot of really quality snaps and then great role players. You've got some options to build your team. If you draft well, you can flip the roster quickly and build good depth.
We also should note very quickly, Daniel, for housekeeping, both you and I are fighting some allergies or cold issues. So if you are finding this on YouTube, at multiple times, you're going to watch more than likely myself, but maybe Daniel cough or hack up a lung. So we apologize in advance for that. I love what you said about the draft, and we'll get there in just moments. When you said it's not the Ferrari, my first thought was it's more of a Toyota Camry draft. Is what people, it's what people tell me. Good players, but maybe not. I don't know, maybe not as many franchise-changing players, but who knows? We'll see in the coming years what that turns out to be. Let's start, Daniel. You still do some work with the Vikings, following the Vikings, obviously big fan. You also do some work as well for MN Vikings Corner. We'll get to the Gophers as well in the back half of this pod. Let's start with the Minnesota Vikings. I think the new general thought seems to be heading towards a Sam Darnold tag and trade of some sorts, where he gets the franchise tag and moved along to another franchise. This, I think, for the Vikings, no matter what the compensation would be, Daniel, would be the best case scenario, because if they let him walk, they're going to get a pick at the end of the third round. If they can tag and trade him for maybe a third round pick this year, fifth round pick next year, heck, maybe it's a second round pick, I think that is obviously much better and more optimal than just letting him walk and getting that late comp pick next year.
Yeah, that's the best case scenario, especially when you have limited draft selections this year. You need to try to get some resources back. And if you can get something this year, it's an advantage. I don't think this probably would be even a discussion if the quarterback class was last year's group, or it was very strong. There's a lot of options. Teams are able to select players through the draft versus, trying to get free agent options. And you look at Darnold, he's obviously the best option available. Limited draft class with not a lot of surefire options. So I think that helps you in the process of doing a tag and trade. Somebody would maybe have some interest in being able to get you, a third round pick and potentially maybe a late round option to be able to facilitate the trade. And so that would give them more draft capital, which obviously they need to try to figure that out. I would believe most likely they'll probably end up trading back from that first round selection just to try to get some more picks, especially since I do feel like there's some good depth in the class, especially on defense, to be able to add some talent there.
When do you trade that first round pick? Is that before the draft, or is that likely a draft night trade?
You'll let the draft board shake out, let somebody slide down a little bit to that range, and potentially somebody calls you and wants to move up, and you're able to facilitate it. But I don't know. I look at this year, is there going to be a lot of trading up going on with the talent, the lack of blue chip talent? I don't know if you'll see a lot of aggressive trades. People who have assets, I think, are going to cling on to them and hold them because they know there's a lot of good players in this draft if you draft wisely and smart.
I want to ask you about the free agent class. I was just scanning my phone here. A general consensus, this isn't maybe a fair comparison because college players, you don't know what you're going to get. It takes a bit more time to see. Free agents, you have the benefit of having NFL film on tape. But the consensus right now is that this free agent class is pretty good, much better than maybe what you can get out of the draft. So, especially for what the Vikings are looking for, offensive line and defensive line, I feel like the Vikings, if they do their homework well, find the right fits, they could do really well in free agency themselves for multiple reasons. Who's available, but also all the money that they have to use and to utilize. Is it fair to say that it's more important for the Vikings to get the free agency class right this year than it is to get the draft right?
Yeah, I would say it's a blend of both. I think the draft is really important this year. I think that's how you build a team that's able to hold up and sustain its depth as the season goes on. You look at like what the Commanders did last year, excellent draft, able to flip that roster on a dime. Minnesota has to be able to get to the point where they're able to consistently draft, add younger talent that they can develop up, invest in the right position groups. That's the challenge this year. I believe that I'm a little bit different in this sense. I see a lot of people talking about, this free agency class. I think there's weaknesses and there's some strengths in this class. I would say that based on what I see from the draft and free agency, I think that you probably go with the defensive back route. Try to get DJ Reed, Javon Holland, maybe a couple of those options would make sense. I also think that there's maybe the chance to solidify the defensive line in the draft. The edge and DT groups are loaded, and I think they'll focus on defensive tackle the draft.
Yeah, Daniel, I think what's most important to the Minnesota Vikings, and we talked about this at the end of the season, I think whether it comes through the draft, whether it comes through free agency, the most important thing they can do is solidify that offensive line and defensive line. Teams and seasons take on different meanings, different avenues to winning championships, but one thing that generally stands up is the teams that own the offensive line and the defensive line in all lines of football tend to be championship contenders. You look at what the Eagles did on the offensive line and the defensive line this year. The Eagles dominated the Super Bowl this year, rushing 4 guys. I mean, their blitz numbers, you might remember off the top of your head. Did they? I'm not even joking. Did they even blitz one time?
No.
Yeah, they brought 4, and for lack of a better term, they kicked the Chiefs' ass that way. And if you can do that without sending extra pressure, that tends to be a really good sign and a really good sign of a good football team. So I think that's priority number 1 for the Minnesota Vikings is offensive line and defensive line. I trust Brian Flores enough that they'll do whatever they need to fix the defense, or to plug and play with the secondary.
I like the offensive line class. I think there's some intriguing options where you got some tackles that can kick into guard. Gray Zabel at North Dakota State is an intriguing player. Cameron Williams at Texas, I think he could maybe kick inside and be a really good guard at the next level. I also look at Donovan Jackson. I think he's my favorite option for the Vikings right now. Ohio State played really well in the big games. Compact, well-built guard, explosive, strikes you, generates instant dent. I think that he's going to be someone that really, really adds to a team and kind of gives the Vikings, he slid outside when Josh Simmons was injured. He was able to play tackle and be very effective. I think Donovan Jackson gives you some versatility and could upgrade the offensive line in a big way. You could probably trade back and get him at the front half of round 2. And also Gray Zabel's interesting at North Dakota State. I think his film is really good. The type of guy that can play all 5 positions on the offensive line. I think he'd be a really good center if you want to take that path. But I think right now you're probably looking at him as a guard. I mean, his core strength, his balance, he's really, really good at just like getting his hands on guys and driving off the ball, good at responding to inside counters. I was watching a ton of players the last 2 weeks, and Zabel popped. I was going in with expectations like, okay, yeah, a lot of people are talking about Zabel. I was actually impressed once I got through the film. I try not to read a lot of stuff. I don't read, I'm not on Twitter a lot. I want to just have my own echo chamber of thoughts, and I definitely supported that Zabel is someone that is legitimate.
A couple of quick Vikings offseason talker specific when it comes to players. Where do you think Sam Darnold winds up? And then I have something a receiver related for you. I think the best place for Sam Darnold would be Pittsburgh. I don't think he's going to wind up there, but I think that would be the best place for him.
I could see him going to the Rams. I see them trying to move Matthew Stafford here. Maybe he ends up with the Las Vegas Raiders, and then the Rams are looking for an option. I saw a lot of people saying that, Jimmy G, maybe they roll with him. Highly doubt that that's going to be the case. I think that they'll definitely look for another option. Maybe it's Aaron Rodgers going to the Rams. Maybe it's Darnold in a tag and trade out to L.A. I'd say those are a couple destinations. Maybe Las Vegas is the fit as well. I think they're going to definitely take a veteran quarterback, whether that's Matthew Stafford, whether that's Sam Darnold. Those are a few spots I could see.
House, I would trade Jordan Addison for a couple reasons. I think he can get you some draft capital. I think when his time comes to get paid, no matter what, he's on a trajectory to get good money. I don't know if he'll get superstar money. Maybe over the next year or two, he could work himself into that. The reason why I say that is you're not going to be able down the road here to pay 2 really good wide receivers top dollar. So I think that's reason number 1 to move him. 2, I'll be honest, and this maybe isn't the best reason, I don't think I can trust him. I would let him be somebody else's problem and let them decide if they want to commit to Jordan Addison long term. I think it just would help the Vikings in many ways. However, the one thing that it would do is you don't logically have a number 2 behind Justin Jefferson. You could maybe find one via free agency. Maybe you find somebody in the draft. I acknowledge that's a flaw there, but I also think right now is probably, unless he has a really good season this upcoming year, probably the highest value you will get for Jordan Addison. And again, I'll admit, maybe a part of my reason for wanting to get rid of him is not a good reason. Maybe he's changed and he's a much better person. He's going to stay out of trouble. That can all be true, but I also flip it to what I started with. I just don't think you can afford to pay 2 wide receivers top dollar if you're trying to build your roster out. So that's my argument for moving Jordan Addison sooner rather than later.
There's a benchmark for wide receiver talent in terms of like who you extend and who you don't. And I think that it's an intriguing thought exercise that you bring up. If you're not intending to bring him back, there's any reservation there, is there an opportunity, to potentially get some assets? But I also look at it like, man, that depth chart right now, you definitely have to really invest resources through the draft and add another free agent if that was the type of move you're going to make. I do feel like right now they need a physical dimension in that wide receiver room, a guy that can really be kind of a mismatch, bigger target, move around in the slot and outside. Andrew Armstrong, a wide receiver out of Arkansas, really like this guy. He's a sleeper player. Haven't heard a lot about him. He's going to test really well at the combine, I believe. We're going to see a lot of – I don't think this wide receiver class is particularly strong, which also gives me a little bit of reservation in making a move like that. But I do understand what you're saying from the standpoint of, like, if there's any reservation in the idea of bringing him back, do you want to get some assets?
Big picture NFL, what are some big names you see moving, finding new landing spots, whether it comes to quarterbacks or even just other players? I know we've had some pretty good players, even not at the quarterback position, told by their franchises, yeah, you can seek another deal somewhere else or see if you can find a trade partner. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting NFL offseason. It always is, but I just feel like we're going to have a lot of big name players playing for other teams next season.
Yeah, it seems like we're kind of at a potential turning point moment. I guess I'm kind of interested to see where DJ Reed ends up. I think he's the top corner. I think the Vikings should be very in the mix on that. What I would personally do is try to sign him and then, bring Murphy back as well, just to solidify the defensive back room. Looking at the draft, I do believe there are some options available, but I don't think it's as strong of a cornerback group top to bottom as I would typically like it to be. So I think that's something to watch for is where DJ Reed ends up. I'm interested in Josh Sweat too. I mean, you saw what he was able to do in the Super Bowl. I would watch a team like the Chicago Bears for him. I think the Chicago Bears need to get another pass rusher that's super dynamic. I've even thought about the Bears. Go look at the Bears draft capital, what they have available. I believe that they could be a team that gets into the Myles Garrett sweepstakes. They're an NFC team. Maybe the AFC, the Browns are willing to trade him into the other conference. They just need another dynamic pass rusher to pair up with the Sweat that they already have. They got Josh Sweat. They got Montez Sweat. I just think a pass rusher for the Bears would be super intriguing. So those are a couple things that I'm watching right now. And what happens with Matthew Stafford? I think that's a ripple effect here. If the Rams indeed end up trading him, it could end up impacting where Darnold goes, because then the quarterback market will shift. The Rams might become interested, and that could be a potential partner.
And Matt Stafford is realistically only going to teams that are Super Bowl ready, correct? I know we've seen some of the rumors about Matthew Stafford winding up with the Vikings for 1 year. I don't think that's going to happen, but it is just kind of fun to talk about. Again, the Steelers make sense for Stafford, but the one thing that I think about, whether it matters or not, Daniel, is that Matt Stafford has played for the better part of his career. He's played, I think it's almost 60% of his games indoors. To now all of a sudden ask him in perhaps his final year of the league to go out to Pittsburgh and play 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 games in crappy weather when you factor in the other teams in that division. I don't know if that makes sense. I think Pittsburgh makes more sense for somebody like Aaron Rodgers if it's truly a one and done. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Stafford. I guess I wouldn't rule the Vikings out, but it just continues to make no sense to me. You wouldn't draft a quarterback 10th overall or 11th. I always butcher that. I can't remember. To not play him in the first 2 years unless he was sitting behind an absolute rock star. I would rather roll the dice with JJ McCarthy after, I know he didn't technically sit, but he was in the offense. He was with the team for a year versus letting a 38, 39-year-old show up and play one season before you go to JJ McCarthy. So it's very interesting. There's so much to talk about, Daniel, and this is what the NFL does well. There is the regular season, the postseason, then there's the rest of the NFL season. It truly never goes away. They've monopolized it well.
The only time is like that last weekend in June through the 4th of July into the middle of July. And then now training camps start like July 17th, the teams that are playing the Hall of Fame game. So it's literally like 3 weeks of the year where there's nothing going on in the NFL.
The only season longer than the NFL season is the MLS season and the NASCAR season, which I'm convinced have no off season. Those teams and sports are always playing. Let me remind everybody about my friends at Beans Coffee Company. I got my Perfectus blend in this little hydro flask here right now. I only got a few sips left. Beans Coffee Company. Go to coffeebybeans.com. That's coffeebybeans.com. They have roasts and blends for everybody. You've heard me talk about them for a couple of years now. Truly great coffee. Small batch coffee roasted locally in Mankato, Minnesota. 9 different blends, plus even a decaf blend. If I've graduated, House, I've now gotten so old, I appreciate a cup of decaf coffee at night, especially in the winter. It just kind of hits. You need that decaf. You need it in your cupboard now.
Well, maybe I'm going to have to try it just to see what I think. I'm a tea guy at night, but...
Okay. Tea without caffeine, though? I
tea
can't have
without caffeine. Yeah.
I can't have caffeine late at night now. It now starts to affect my sleep. You can order by the bag or set up a coffee subscription at coffeebybeans.com. Here's one great thing they're doing for you. If you use the promo code SportsChat, that's promo code SportsChat, you'll save 10% at checkout. So you're supporting me, you're supporting a local business at coffeebybeans.com. Promo code SportsChat. Again, I love the Mikado and the Perfectus, but truthfully, everything I've had from there is fantastic. It's a cut above. Coffeebybeans.com. Promo code SportsChat. Okay, let's talk a little Gophers hoops, if you don't mind, maybe even men's and women's. So the men in conference play start off 0-6. They rally to win 6 of 9. Now we're back to that point, Daniel, after 2 home losses to Penn State and Northwestern, teams at the time that were below you in the conference. Then you look ahead at the final 3 games. You're at Nebraska, a place I believe the Gophers have yet to win. Then you get Wisconsin at home. Then you go to Rutgers, who technically is beatable, but they have 4 of the top recruits in the country. Now you're wondering if the Gophers will win another game this season. They're up against it for qualifying for the Big Ten tournament. I know the buyout's hefty, but I got a hard time believing that Ben Johnson's coming back. And I have been hard on Ben Johnson, but I want to clarify, which I've done with you before, Daniel, just so people hear this. I will never cheer for the Gophers to lose. It does no good to lose in college sports. You're not getting a better draft pick. I'll never cheer for them to lose. I'm not anti-Ben Johnson. I am not. I want him to do well. If he's done here, I want him to do well at his next stop because he will coach again. A la Richard Pitino, who's having success at New Mexico. I will say this, though. Even in today's current era, and there are many things stacked against you at the University of Minnesota, somebody else deserves to play that poor hand and see if they can make it better in a 4-year window. 4 years of not sniffing the NCAA tournament and only qualifying for one NIT tournament. Look, I get it. We've talked about this before, Daniel. With this university, we tend to think the basketball program is better than it is. Historically, they go to one tournament every 3 to 4 years. I will say, though, that's not good enough. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask for more, even if there are many things stacked against you that will stop that from happening. So I think it's time. It's a logical jumping off point. Daniel, this team is going to win 6, maybe 7 conference games, and they're going to lose 90+% of their production aside from Isaac Asima. Everybody else who scored a bucket's going to leave. This is the logical jumping off point. So I have to believe Mark Coyle's going to find the $3 million, and more than likely, this is it for Ben Johnson. I don't necessarily want that to happen. I feel for him. He didn't want to come here and struggle. I get that. But you just can't be winning 7 or less conference games in 4 straight years. Can't happen. Although last year they were slightly above that. I get that, but still only an NIT qualifier. So I think it's time. I think this is the logical point. There's no telling, Daniel, the next coach could be worse. I get that. But that doesn't mean you can't try to be better.
It's an interesting time right now. I do feel like the NIL is a huge piece of this, that Minnesota is going to need to figure out what it takes to build a team that can compete in this NIL landscape from a resource standpoint. I do know that no matter who is here next season, they are going to need to commit more NIL funds, and I believe they will. I think that's in the plans. I do believe that things will get better with the revenue share piece where they can pay players on top of the NIL package that is available. They will need to figure out what that looks like, how all the pieces come together. I felt like after that West Coast swing, the program had a lot of momentum. They were showing some growth. I thought guys were getting better. And then all of a sudden it's like, you get that game against Penn State. Good crowd there. People were into the game. Just did not perform well, looked lethargic. Same type of effort against Northwestern. You look at losing to Washington, Penn State, this last game with Northwestern all at home, bottom half teams, bottom tier teams in the conference. There's certainly a lot of decisions that have to be made. I would say that, Mark Coyle has to decide. He's made it clear that the NCAA tournament is what he aspires to consistently strive for. He talked about this season if if they could retain the roster that he thought it was an NCAA tournament caliber team, which I do agree probably is the case if they're able to keep Hawkins and Payne, which they're unable to do, and they had a ton of roster turnover. If they do make a change, this is a natural transition period because, you're kind of going into a new landscape here with the rev share, the NIL, and the whole idea that your roster is going to be flipped again. You're going to have a lot of turnover. This is, the Ben was talking a lot about the immaturity of the team in a sense that like they didn't play very focused against Penn State. I think that it's like you got an older team. You took a lot of transfers. It just hasn't felt like it's meshed consistently this year. I thought they were getting close, and then I'm like, I don't know. There are a lot of things behind the scenes that like Coyle and those people see that they're going to have to decide, hey, what's best for this program long term. Anybody they do hire, though, has to be able to generate NIL revenue. They have to be able to do that. That's like the prerequisite. If you're making a change, you better hire somebody that's got good NIL ability.
Well, and I would say this, if you're going to be bad next year, you might as well be bad next year in year one of a new coach, bringing in new players and hopefully building that new culture. Because if you're going to be bad next year with Ben Johnson, he's going to lose his job anyways. So again, to me, that's where you're at the logical jumping off point. I'd rather do it now than 15 games into next season. 1000% agree with you. There are a few coaches out there sitting on the sidelines who I think are looking for horses to hop on that I think could bring you some of that instant NIL money. One of them, I think, one of them, I'll say this. I don't know if his name's logically been floated out there, so I don't want to say it, but he does analyst work for ESPN, and he coached at Indiana and Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the guy, he brings some of that NIL credibility. Does it work here? I don't know, but I'm with you. I like Nico Medved. I like Brian Dutcher. Are they going to show up with that NIL money? I don't know. So a lot of that is on Mark Coyle to figure out. But I just don't think you can stay at the status quo. Now, if Ben Johnson's back next year, of course I'm going to cheer for them. I hope they go 20-10 and make the NCAA tournament. I'm not advocating for the guy to have a terrible life and get the bleep out of here. I just think we're at the logical point where something needs to be different. But I mean, again, look at this, Daniel. We let Richard Pitino. I get it. He had to be gone. Things fizzled out. His last 2 years here weren't great. But now look at him. He's had 2 wonderful years at New Mexico. He's more than likely going to cash in. I secretly hope Richard Pitino gets the Indiana job. I think that would be awesome. But again, that's another case, Daniel, that a lot of what's happening at the U isn't directly the coach's fault. Tubby Smith, again, I get it. He didn't necessarily reach what Kentucky wanted, but he was going to the NCAA tournament every year at Kentucky. He comes here, he's not going to the NCAA tournament every year. Richard Pitino, I think we all believe he's probably a pretty darn good coach. 3 tournaments in 7 years. Dan Munson, probably a pretty good coach. He had a lot stacked against him with the sanctions. 1 tournament in 7 years. So it's not easy to go to the tournament here for many reasons, but I'm kind of rehashing where I started. That doesn't mean you can stand idly by. And I'll say this again, Daniel, it starts at the top. The president and the board of regents has to care about athletics. If they don't, these are the results you're going to continually get.
The job description changed a lot, too, since Ben got hired. I mean, you got the NIL piece becoming a bigger part of the process. You've got, the transfer portal reaching a whole new level. And then now you have the revenue share piece. So there's a lot of things that changed. It is a situation where now those who are on the cutting edge of thinking, looking outside the box and how they do things, within reason, like fusing what you've done before with where this thing is going, those people are going to put themselves in a spot to potentially gain an edge. I think this is an exciting time for college athletics. I think it's a time where, schools like Minnesota, they can put themselves in a really good spot if they think creatively, do this thing in a fashion that's innovative and outside the box, thinking about how they build their teams, both football and basketball. There's a chance to get competitive with the way the CFP is going to change now potentially, and with the rev share piece.
Well, I'll tell you what, Daniel, this all gets a lot easier if you just drink more NIL beer, NIL coffee, and eat more NIL pizza. If you can do that, This will radically change. Also, I get we don't have money. Would it kill us to retrofit the lighting at Williams Arena and at least do a paint job? My God, is that a depressing place to walk into these days?
See, I still like it.
Especially when it's half full.
I still like. I love going to a game there. I think it's my favorite venue to watch a game at. The whole market. I do too. I would massively renovate it or build a new arena that replicates it. But I think you're also doing yourself a disservice right now if that is the arena you're trying to sell to kids. I think we'll agree to disagree on that. We have limited time left, so I want to play a fun game with you, Daniel. And let me hang on. I haven't played this in forever. I got to do this. Where's this at? Here we go.
Don't worry, Daniel. I'm keeping the under.
Who's in and who's out with the Gophers coaching? We've had a lot of changes this offseason.
Oh, man.
Gopher football, who's in, who's out, and do we have a spring game date yet? And if so, will it be played for the public?
Corey Heatherman, out. Danny Collins, in. Winston Delattividier, out. Dennis Stoughton Carter, in. Nick McKissick-Luke, in. Jaden Everett, out. Nick McKissick-Luke, in. Or no, Nick McKissick. Oh my God, you're playing a mind game with me. Nick McKissick-Luke, out. Jaden Everett, in. So there you go. There's your essential coaching staff moves.
And our guy, Mo Ibrahim, the new running backs coach at Kent State for the, I hate to do this to you, Daniel, probably fairly soon to be departed Kenny Burns.
KB.
How much more of a leash does Kenny Burns have at Kent State?
That's toughest. That's one of the toughest jobs in America, man. I'm hoping this year he can get it rocking. He walked into a very, very difficult situation there, so I'm hopeful that he can figure it out. Definitely made a lot of changes this offseason.
I hope they give him a full 4 years, Daniel.
You have to there.
It's easy for me to say as I'm talking about running Ben Johnson out of town, but the Gopher basketball situation is in a much better shape than where Kent State football is at. So I think he deserves a full 4 years to try and get that program going in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, you look at now, there's a ton of coaching staff changes in college football. Everybody's moving everywhere, going to the NFL because, the lifestyle, you're to the point where the lifestyle is better for coaches in the NFL in a sense because the calendar is more fixed, it's set, there's downtime. Here, I mean, you don't know what you're going to get. I think it's going to get better here as things change, but right now people are looking to go to the NFL.
GophersGuru.com is the place for all of what's happening in Dinkytown. Is that correct, Daniel House?
It is. It's the spot for Gopher football. A lot of stuff on the site right now, studies from the offseason, and getting you all the information you need on who's in and who's out, what to expect from the additions.
Hey, let's clinch another Big Ten hockey regular season championship this weekend. Let's go to Happy Valley and make it Unhappy Valley as Bob celebrates another Big Ten regular season championship. Let's do that, Daniel.
I've never been to a Gopher hockey game. Maybe someday.
I know. We got to change that. I'm taking you next year. Well, I'll write that down. I'm taking you next year, but we're going to go to a game. They're now on this impressive run of 10,000 plus every night. We're going on a night.
I have never been to a pro or college hockey game. Fun fact.
That astounds me. I'm fixing that next year.
People are probably going, this guy.
At Daniel House, MN on the X machine. Thank you, Daniel.
All right. Thanks.
That is Mr. Daniel House. I am at the Ross Brendel on the X machine. Hopefully back again in this feed next week. Thank you so much for listening.